at De Anza College, which is going to treat over the following 12 weeks the subject of the Santa Clara Valley in transition. As many of you know today, we are undergoing a very dramatic change from an era of agricultural communities to one of high technology. And in your own communities, you probably have noticed the number of orchards that have soon become electronics companies. And over the next 12 weeks, we're going to look at that change through a series of special presentations by guest lecturers and faculty, which will be teaching at the college, some guest faculty. And with us this evening, we have 3 of those faculty members who have played a very important part in the history of the Valley and have seen the history of the Valley change over the past few years. I have Chatham Forbes, who served in the County Executive's Office and as Public Information Officer, and he is teaching a course and will be giving presentations treating the Valley in transition. And Yvonne Jacobson, who is a member of one of the early Sunnyvale farm families. And then we also have here Jim Riley, who was the founder and president of Intersil and also served as president of Signetics, and will be providing a perspective on the new electronics industry that has come into the Valley recently. So what we'd like to do this evening is to have a conversation between us and give you some insight into the kind of change that has occurred and also the background on some of the material that's going to be covered over the next 12 weeks. And I think to start with, the economic base of the Santa Clara Valley, which is being transformed right now, is that of agriculture. And to start with, I'd like to have Yvonne Jacobson give you a little background on the project that she has just completed, which is the development of an exhibit that treats the history of the orchard farm family in Santa Clara Valley. And maybe, Yvonne, you could at first describe a little bit about your own family. Why did you get involved with an exhibit, and what is your own background?
It was very much the result of recognizing the fact that our farm, which is still in Sunnyvale, is somewhat typical of the family farms that stretched from one end of the county in Gilroy all the way north to Mountain View and even Palo Alto. And that being a typical farm, we represented that part of the Valley's history which was literally slipping sort of underground and out of view.
Which farm is it? You might describe to the viewers where it was located.
The farm is actually located at the cross-section of El Camino Real and Matilda Avenue in Sunnyvale, and it has been in that same location, at least a part of our family, for almost 80 years. So having recognized that we were typical, I made the decision to take a leave of absence from De Anza and to concentrate my efforts on trying to do a photo documentary of the farm's history in the hopes of preserving some slice of our valley's past through the story of my own family. And as I got into the process of photo documenting and of doing oral tapes of my family and then people that we knew, I began to see that this was a much larger story that needed to be recorded now, because it really will be, it is slipping away and nearly gone. So that's what prompted me to do the exhibit, and took me about 2 years to bring it from the point of the idea to the actual conception, of which these photographs in back of us are examples.
The exhibit that Yvonne is just mentioning here is one which was developed with a grant from the California Council for the Humanities to De Anza College, and also several companies locally helped fund the development of a photographic story of the Santa Clara Valley farm. And this exhibit is now being shown in the California History Center at De Anza College and will be there until February 6th.
We actually changed that date.
Oh,
You
that's
remember?
right. It will be there until
January 29th.
January 29th.
Right.
Then this is actually a traveling exhibit, and it's been at IBM, at Syntax, at Triton Museum, and it's now going down to Gavilan College after it leaves here, so it has quite a schedule. Yvonne, what would you say the other farmers locally, you've worked with a lot of them in documenting their own stories, what do they feel about the change that's occurring to them?
I think there's a tremendous sense of regret in a nostalgic way, but in a very personal way. It's one of fear and dread because their own lifestyle is being threatened. And those who feel strongly about maintaining a farming lifestyle have lifted their roots, so to speak, and planted them elsewhere in California. Some of them are very staunchly committed to Santa Clara Valley, continue here, but under the worst kind of conditions. It's with never knowing if you're going to make it through the next year, and now with the medfly problem, the anxieties of being a farmer in this valley are almost too great to bear. Many who have been marginally successful over the last few years will more or less be pushed under because of the medfly crisis. So it's not the best situation. On the other hand, farmers have withstood every kind of catastrophe and every kind of natural disaster. Many have gone under, but they are a breed that hangs on, and they have a long-term view of things. They don't look, just down the road a few months. They look in terms of years, and they try and regulate their lives to survive the very difficult years,
Mm-hmm.
hold on, and then wait for some better fortune, better luck.
Mm-hmm. Chatham, from your perspective, having been involved with Santa Clara County and your involvement with history as well, locally, do you think that the planners that oversaw a lot of this growth and change, what do you recall from their own perspective? Did they plan for us to lose the agriculture and to move into new industry?
Yes, they had to take what was given. And right after World War II, a very, very influential industrial survey was nationally disseminated, which pinpointed the southern Alameda County, Santa Clara County area as the #1 new growth area for the country, for industry. So immediately the mechanism of banks, real estate companies, chambers of commerce, any number of people, again, governmental agencies, all began the usual American booster machine to bring people here, to bring industry here, and to make real what the industrial survey predicted. And they did, and what that meant was that the planning department, the outstanding planning department is the county planning department, and in its big years, it was under Carl Belser, a man of world distinction, led in the attempt to contain within reasonable bounds the growth and to guide the industrial growth, the change in economic base from an agricultural to an industrial one in a reasonable way, to clean industry, to a high-level industry. And the city planning departments worked, there were 16 cities one time here, worked in conjunction with the county planning department and with planning departments regionally to attempt to preserve amenities here. And I think they did a very good job. They originated, I believe they originated at least in this country, the green belting, and that was Carl Belser's baby. The green belting, where they would try to keep this from becoming another Los Angeles by preserving agricultural belts and setting aside open space lands, parks, because the more urban and metropolitan you get, the greater the psychological tensions in the population, according to the park specialists, and therefore you needed more and more parks in proportion to the number of people, not less and less. So the great fight was for green and open space and the preservation of agricultural industry. I think they did a wonderful job. The Pacific Flyway, where the Leslie Salt Ponds were. This is where millions of wildfowl land every year on their way between north and south. And if we had turned that into, sort of a temperate zone Hawaii, as some people tried, where would the birds have landed? In other words, the planners took a broad-based view of how do you manage this transition and preserve all aspects of the enormously complex entity that is a metropolis. That's rather a long-winded answer.
Yeah. Well, as a representative of the new industry of late, Jim, why did you decide on the fertile soil of Santa Clara Valley? Why did you come here first in the valley?
The truth is, I didn't decide. I was transferred here. In 1964, Signetics in Sunnyvale was undergoing some difficulties, and the majority shareholder in Signetics was Corning Glassworks, with whom I was employed. And one Thursday afternoon in September, I was called in and said, we have a new job for you, and take your time, think about it, let us know Monday. Because we have a plane Monday night to California. And so that's how I got here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why I stayed maybe is the question you want to answer.
Well, yeah. Why did you stay, and what is it about Santa Clara Valley that has generated this the heat and intensity of the electronics industry? What is there here?
It's two questions. And the latter one, I think, is interesting. First of all, I want to set the record straight, just in case any of my associates in the industry are listening to this, which may or may not happen. I did not found Intersil. I came in several years after the company was founded. So I'm not a founding entrepreneur of any of the companies here, although I've been involved in a number of them. In my opinion, the electronics activity in the Silicon Valley, two of the main contributors were Dr. Terman at Stanford a long time ago, in 1939, when he persuaded Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard, who were doing other things, that they should go into business here. And at the same time, and I'm not totally familiar with the dates, but there were other older line people who are still here, by the way, Dr. Dean Watkins at Watkins Johnson, Bob Johnson, his partner, Bill Eitel, Bill McCullough, and Dr. John Granger. These were the real pioneers in the late 30s and the 40s. So what happened was these people were encouraged by Stanford, who also, and I'm not familiar with the details, the Stanford Industrial Park was set up so that specifically for industry and under rather rigid control as to how the industry would be developed versus land versus buildings, which we can still see when we ride up 280. Then there was another event that took place during World War II, but it took place more in Southern California, and that is that the productivity and the leading edge nature of California became known, in my opinion, in the aerospace industry and in the defense industry, which was primarily concentrated at Hughes, Convair, Rockwell, and so forth, Douglas Aircraft in Southern California, because after the war, Southern California started moving out faster than Northern California, but it was just a matter of time before whatever happened there would move up here. And the third factor, which I think has affected this situation, is the start of the semiconductor industry, which really started when Dr. Shockley, who co-invented a transistor in 1947 with two others at Bell Labs, decided to bring his first venture out here. And he recruited some very bright people from the East Coast to come out here with him to start Shockley Semiconductor right up in Palo Alto. And about a year later, there were a number of people who are still very active in the valley who disagreed, as I understand it, technically with what was being done and they proceeded to get backing through one of the investment bankers from Sherman Fairchild, and started Fairchild Semiconductor, which is really the grandfather, the great-grandfather of every semiconductor company in the Valley. So the three prime factors that got this thing started were the defense industry in LA moving north, and that was pretty much accelerated when Lockheed moved up here in 1959. That's when we became critical mass. I don't think anybody knew it, but that's when it happened, in my opinion. And the activity at Stanford and the activities in 1957 when Fairchild Semiconductor started. Those were the forces that started this.
Does Stanford University still play a major role in keeping companies here or providing engineers for the company? Are they still one of the reasons why companies stay here? Or?
Well, I would say so. I am not an alumnus of Stanford, and I'm not that close to the university, but my personal opinion is Stanford is a very positive contributor to the technology climate in the area. Certainly, there's been a heavy relationship with HP and Stanford for the obvious reasons. But you just have to ride through Stanford Industrial Park to see the impact of Stanford, because before we had it in Santa Clara, before we had it in southern Santa Clara, the activity was in Palo Alto in the Stanford Industrial Park. So I would say that Stanford has made a distinct contribution and continues to do so.
Wouldn't it be fair to add that San Jose State, the University of Santa Clara, and Foothill and De Anza notably responded at different levels to the need for technological specialists? Also, in addition to Stanford, Stanford does maintain a very active tie with many of these, I know, even to the extent of establishing a sort of extension relationship, which they, of course, look down on in any other field, but they will certainly do it in that field.
Well, I think it's the whole complex of the Bay Area, the intellectual ferment between California, University of California, and Stanford. On either side of the bay, you have centers of technological research and centers in which all kinds of things are developing. Most recently, the DNA is one of the newest technological breakthroughs, which is pioneered both at Stanford and University of California, to the point at which I believe Stanford and UC Berkeley are developing companies, private companies, to pioneer work on a profit basis.
Do you see, Jim, the companies, they seem, this phenomenon of one company providing the personnel or backing for another company to begin. Can you describe that a little bit, that type of activity that occurs, and do you see that continuing to happen here in the Valley?
I think the entrepreneurial spirit is probably higher in the Santa Clara Valley than it's anywhere else in the world. And I'm not sure I know why, other than the evidence of its success is readily apparent on your freeways and up in the hills. People take the risk, and those that succeed, it's fairly obvious that they succeeded in any number of ways. And you're now into your third generation of entrepreneurs. In other words, you had the 40s and the 50s with the older line companies. You had the 60s with the Fairchilds, the National Semiconductors, the Memorexes, the Measurexes, and now we have in the 70s and the 80s we have currently we have a whole new series of these companies being started. Some of whom are started by guys who started companies earlier. I regard entrepreneurship as one of the country's prime assets. You hear an awful lot about our death struggle with Japan and the automotive industry and the electronics industry. And one of the clear-cut advantages we have is the ability for people to take an idea and get financing from a very unique financial institution called venture capitalists. It doesn't exist in the framework that it exists here anywhere else in the world, where someone with an idea who can demonstrate who has no sales, 4 or 5 people, a leased facility built on one of our ex-farms, and they can demonstrate to these people that they've either done it before, can do it again, can get their backing and go out and do it.
it's interesting, this aspect of transition, something about the Santa Clara Valley environment, that here today we're world important because of our electronics industry and what's happening here. But Yvonne, how was the Valley world important because of the farming that went on here?
We were one of the 15 most important agricultural centers in the United States at one point. During the wars, we played an important part in supplying dried fruits to troops in Europe and Asia. And we represented, I think one of the statistics that never fails to surprise me is that at one point, 1 out of every 2 prunes in the world came from this valley. And there's some who say it's 1 out of every 3. In any case, in either case, it's a very impressive statistic. And one of the things that you mentioned, which was very characteristic of the valley in the time of the farms, and which is characteristic today of the high technology companies, we had a very receptive environment here for people from all over the world. The farms were settled by ethnic groups who represent Asia and Europe and places in between. And there was a structure, a social structure, which tended to be based on a hierarchy of Anglo-Saxon blood, so to speak. But by and large, everybody ignored it. They were too busy working, making a living, earning a living to support their families and to get them into colleges so that they could go up the social ladder, on the economic ladder. And today, in Santa Clara Valley, we have a virtual international community. It represents, I don't think there is any country in the world that isn't represented, as the brains that have spawned the various companies, the people that staff the technicians, all the way down, right down the line, represent various cultures. And there is something that is about our community that has welcomed in an open arms sort of way the variety of national experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to comment on something Jim mentioned. You know, you mentioned the success that this venturesomeness has brought. Not too many years ago, the U.S. Census revealed that the San Jose SMSA, Standard Metropolitan Statistical Area, which simply means the Santa Clara Valley or Santa Clara County area. Doesn't really mean, it just centers on San Jose. And that's not, you know, the real entity. It's Santa Clara County. Had the second highest median income in the United States among SMSAs, metropolitan areas, the second highest. Mm-hmm. This was the result of the hard work of many different entities, in addition to these entrepreneurs, striving to bring about a high kind of industry instead of the glue factory that San Jose tried to bring in and locate next to the Mercury News building, which was a big faux pas and didn't succeed, of course, tremendous outcry. Instead, they brought in Signetics, for example, and then the results were inevitable, that it would be I would like to ask you a question. Where does we have tremendous interest rates, and of course, you know, the Federal Reserve Board, Mr. Volcker, is using his favorite button to hold down investment and thus slow down the economy, and so on and so forth. So we must have other special sources for venture capital in this valley. 20% is very prohibitive, isn't it?
Right.
Where does it come from?
Well, the venture, I might explain the venture capital community. Basically, the venture capital community is a banking function separate from banks. It's a collection of funds which are contributed by wealthy individuals, insurance companies, and bank trust departments. We're in a typical fund, and I won't give any commercials to any of them, but a typical fund today has $40 million under management, or $30 million. They have raised it from a variety of sources. The partners participate primarily in the profits of the fund. They don't get big salaries. They get livable salaries, but their kicker is that the fund goes up. And And if the fund doesn't go up, then they have just worked at a nominal salary for 7 years. And there's typically 4 to 5 professional people, ex-managers of businesses in the fund, and they evaluate proposals, and they place equity money in the companies, not debt money, so there is no interest rate to contend with. These people are strictly concerned with capital gains. They have no interest in, other than some of the legalistic things of preferred stock and dividends, but these are usually subterfuges to hedge them on the downside. But the upside of every venture fund is capital appreciation, not interest. So in some respects, the venture funds are taking the banks out of a business that the banks, in some respects, should not be out of, and that is helping to grow small companies. In some respects, as a businessman, many banks strike me as giving me all the money I need when I don't need it, all the money I want when I don't need it. But the venture people come in when there is no track record, when there is no series of formulas to determine how much, and they look people in the eyeballs and get a look at a product, at a market, and at the people, and bet on them. And it's been fantastically successful. I would estimate that between San Francisco and San Jose, there's $1 billion in this peninsula under venture capital management, which is a hell of a lot of money when you spread it around $3 to $5 million at a time or less. It's an interesting institution.
Do you see it continuing to prosper at the rate it has in the past?
Yes. I think it is a self-synergizing function.
Well, I have another question along this line. When we were in the middle of the farming period, and I could go to the top of our water tank and look in every direction and see nothing but orchards as far as the eye could see, no one would have guessed that the Santa Clara Valley would have changed so drastically within 25 years. Put on a visionary cap if you can and look down the breadth of history there, and what do you see here in 25 years, 50 years?
I see some problems. I have changed my definition of Silicon Valley to Silicon Island. Those that are on aren't getting off, and those that aren't on can't get on. And we've been hurt substantially in this valley in the last 3 to 4 years versus Colorado, Washington, all the Sun Belt states, and elsewhere, simply because in many cases, and if you want to get an example of this, pick up a current version of the Christian Science Monitor and see what you can buy in Wellesley, Mass. for $100,000. There's a nice house in there that has 7 bedrooms, 3 baths, and 4 acres for $110,000. And here you can get something very far south in San Jose, 5 to an acre. So the valley is somewhat a victim of its own success. We're landlocked. We've got 2 mountain ranges and an ocean, and there's only so much space in this valley, and we're rapidly using it up. So I foresee specifically that production will continue to move away from the valley, that the valley will tend to be more of a head factory, which is a plus in some respects, but it also will change the nature of a lot of the towns, which have been working man towns, to non-working man towns. I think ultimately, unless we make some changes, unless something happens in housing on a relative basis, Santa Clara Valley is going to suffer versus Phoenix, versus Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Boulder, Colorado, almost everywhere. Simply, the price of housing here is not only prohibitive, it's outrageous in terms of a young person. I have a 26-year-old son who has no hope of ever buying a house in the Santa Clara Valley unless I help him. And that's I don't want to turn that into a housing diatribe, but I think, as opposed to what it was when I moved out here in 1964, you could move to Saratoga, and my first house cost $46,000.
This brings up one of the subjects that we're going to be treating later on in this series, and that's one that will be addressed by Roger Mack, who is an economist and has written several studies for the ABAG, the Area for Bay Area, Association of Bay Area Governments, where he has looked at the problem of housing versus industry versus lifestyle in Santa Clara Valley. And that lifestyle is going to be changing very rapidly, as Jim has said. And so later on in the series, let me describe a few of the other things that we're going to be treating. Jim Riley here, maybe you want to mention just briefly what you're going to be looking at over the 3 evenings, the 3 evenings that you're going to be with us.
Well, I thought it would be interesting to take you back to the start of the semiconductor business back in 1957 and show you, just what a prolific animal has developed in terms of offspring for companies and benefits and problems. Not only the offspring in the semiconductor industry itself, but many other industries, such as Apple Computer, which wouldn't exist without cheap semiconductors. So we're going to focus on the company offshoots, try to give you some impact of payroll impact on the valley. I have a favorite thesis, which I feel that the semiconductor business has been one of the prime foreign policy movers at no cost to the government, and I'll talk about that in my talk. We have provided hundreds of thousands of jobs on the Asian Rim at no cost to Washington, and a considerable benefit to our economy and to our country. And we're going to talk about some of the applications of the products, some of the new products that have come up, some of the benefits. Try to give you a total look at the semiconductor and its growth, the industry's growth, the product growth, and the pluses and minuses of the industry. And I'll try to be objective, which is difficult.
One of the last evenings that Jim will be with us, he's going to bring in a few other people from other companies to give their own perspectives on the industry. And Yvonne, you're going to be providing a couple of sessions for the series. What will you be covering in that?
Primarily, I will deal with the past. We'll try and fill the viewer in on the background that led us up to where we are in the technological sphere. I will look at the history of agriculture and the concept of the family farm as it is part of the American experience on a national basis, and our own contributions to it. We will actually do a walking tour of the exhibit and look at some of the artifacts and the artwork, the photographs. We have some classic photographs from some of America's finest photographers, including Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange.
And as part of Yvonne's series, we'll also be showing a film of Santa Clara Valley in 1920. It's black and white, of course, and originally it was a silent film, but you'll have a view of the farm families working and the valley that was. And Chatham Forbes, what are a few of the areas that you're going to be covering for this series and in some of your other programs?
Well, incidentally, I'd certainly want my class to see that film. That's The Valley of Hearts Delight.
Yeah.
That's the first of those two films that were made. And I have a very nostalgic feeling since my family arrived here in 1923 in this valley. And it looks very familiar to me and like a bygone day. And as far as the two classes that I have, which are closely coordinated classes, and I expect that most of my class on the new Silicon Valley of Hearts Delight will also go with us on the space age tour to NASA. So we have a couple of coordinated classes. But I've got to give some sort of survey going back to Indian and Hispanic times, showing the different community models for existence on this land of the Santa Clara Valley, and get into the transitional period through the American agricultural period just as a survey. And I hope we'll be able to avail ourselves of some of the special speakers that you will have, Yvonne, to give us expert testimony, and then start talking about the coordinated efforts to manage, if you will, the development of a metropolis, a modern metropolis of high technology with reasonable amenities. I think that we have succeeded in that remarkably. True, maybe 200 years from now they'll laugh at our efforts, but I think that the Santa Clara Valley, the people of the Santa Clara Valley, have concertedly worked to achieve some pretty happy compromises. But the process has been very complex and very fascinating, and it is a historical stream of a continuum of human endeavor that's quite fascinating historically. We'll be taking some field trips. We're going to go to the San Francisco Bay Model in Sausalito, to the wildlife refuge along the bay. We'll go to South County and compare it to the urban county here, our area. And we may even go to Marin Headlands for a purpose I'll describe later. We'll have 4 speakers from the Telecommunications Corporation, from SRI at Stanford Research Institute, from NASA, and then Eric Carruthers at the Santa Clara County Planning Department, who's been with us in this process for many, many years now, maybe 20. So I really look forward to this and to coordinating with these other people, because I think the whole concept of the Valley in Transition is excellent. And I'd like to recommend that people come into the Trianon on the De Anza campus and get a copy of the Californian magazine that is produced by the California History Center, which has a very good little feature on the Valley in Transition series of courses.
Well, we hope you have enjoyed our presentation this evening, and that we've encouraged you to be interested in the topics that will be covered. And once again, there will be a series of 12 different segments, and they should be aired in the evening, 7 to 9 p.m. on Thursday evenings. And thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, all of you, for being here as well.
Is that an extra?
Yeah, it is an extra, yeah.
All right.
Did we come out on time?
No, we were early.
I don't know.
We were early.
I don't know.
15 minutes early, right?